So, nice to be with you. And here's hoping that the feed stays up and that I can tell you some stories today. Welcome to those who are joining me. I'm Grace and we're having some salty tales for the shore to sea today from various parts of Scotland and a bit further as well. And through this time I'm going to be checking the messages, so if you fancy sending a wee hello Shian, nice to see you. Hey Dawn, you've got the fire on and food flowing, ready for some stories on the street day. And there's Indy. Hi Indy, nice to see you. So just to start with, guys, I thought I'd give you a wee riddle. And this riddle is, I'm going to say it a couple of times and then we'll get the answer after your first story. So, in the air I wander, o'er the sea I glide, on the sand you'll not see me, I'm rarely still, I never hide. So, let's see if you can get that riddle. I'll tell you again. In the air I wander, o'er the sea I glide, on the sand you'll not see me, I'm rarely still, I never hide. Okay, so see how you get on with that, and I'll be looking for answers in the messages, please, once we've had a story. And the first story I'm going to tell you today is called The Lonely Giant, and it's by a guy called Alistair MacLean. Did you know that there used to be giants all over Scotland, and I'm sure all over Great Britain as it was then? But as time passed, giants were quite unpopular because they were usually messy, noisy, and they weren't very careful where they put their feet. And over time, they became fewer and fewer. But one giant, whose name was Angus, he was a very polite giant, and he never stood on any farms or animals, and he was very, very careful of people, very kind. But it wasn't easy being a giant. Trying to communicate with humans was awkward. But there was one village he liked to go to, and in that village there was one cottage, and beside the cottage there were fields, and in this house lived Morag. And Morag, on a good day when the sun was out, not like today, she'd be outside with her spinning wheel, and she would be working hard, and Angus would look over and he would see that she was outside, and he would wave to Morag and she would wave back, and he would come and he would lie across the fields. Now, there were dry stone dikes between the fields, that's stone walls. And I don't know if you've ever had a lumpy bed, but a dry stone wall is a bit like a very lumpy bed. But he didn't mind, because Morag was fine company, although it was difficult to hear her. And the only way he could manage it was by lifting her up to his lug. And then she would shout at the top of her voice, and it was really tickly. And then he would start giggling, and she would start shuggling, and she would nearly fall off his hand. And, well, it just went on like that. And if he tried to speak to her, he did it in a tiny whisper, but that usually blew her to the other side of the house. But they were very fond of each other. But one morning, when Angus woke up, he thought to himself, this is not much fun. It's quite lonely. I'll go and have a word with Morag. So along he went, beautiful day, and there she was outside her cottage. And he lay down and he said, Morag, what am I going to do? And she said, what's wrong? I'm so lonely. And Morag said, well, I know what I'd do if you were a lot smaller. I'd marry you. But she said it under her breath because she knew there was no way that could happen. but she really, really liked Angus. But she sighed and she said, Angus, you need to go and speak to Farsight the eagle, because I'm sure Farsight would know if there's any other giants going about. Oh, that's a good idea. He'd seen Farsight just this morning. So off he went, striding over the fields and away up to the mountains. Didn't take very long. And there was Farsight, eyeing up some sheep on another mountainside. Not the sheep. The farmer won't be very pleased with you at all if you do that. Aye, aye, said Farsight. What you needing? Well, Farsight, I've got a question to ask you. You travel all over the place, and I just wondered, have you ever seen another giant in your travels? Ah, said Farsight. Getting lonely, are we? Aye, I am, said Angus. Well, I have seen one giant, and that giant lives on a little island called the Isle of Alva. It's off the west coast of Scotland. You need to look for the Blue Cove, and there's a big beach there. And if you go about 25, 35 miles out to sea, you'll find the island. You'll find the giantess. Oh, thank you, said Angus. And without further ado, off he went. And he travelled past all the mountains and eventually came to the west coast. It didn't take very long. And he looked up the coast, and sure enough, there was a sign for the Blue Cove. And below, a gorgeous beach stretching for miles. Oh, that's bonny, said Angus. But he saw something on the sand. A great big lump of a blue whale. Oh, that doesn't look right, said Angus. So he went down the cliff and went up to the blue whale, and the blue whale opened one eye and went, Help! What are you doing on the sand? I didn't mean to. I fell asleep on a sandbar and the tide went out and I can't get back to sea. Oh, mighty, said Angus. Well, I'll do my best to help you. And grabbing hold of the blue whale's tail, Angus hooked and he hooked and he hooked. And eventually he pulled the blue whale so that it was half in, half out of the water. And then the blue whale was able to wriggle and squirm and wriggle and squirm, turned itself around and went into the deep water. Dive, dive, dive down. What a relief. And then it came back up. Oh, you all right? Oh, aye, said the blue whale. Thank you so much. Oh, no bother. I'm glad I could help you. Now tell me, have you ever seen the Isle of Alva and a giantess? Oh, said the blue whale, I have. Do you know where it is then? Aye, it's just out that way. Oh, why? Well, I've heard there's a giantess living there and I'd really like to marry her. Are you sure? Said the blue whale. Well, I don't know of any other giantesses around. True. Well, I could take you if you like. Well, I can't swim very well. Even more reason for me to take you. You could hold on to my tail. Well, there is another thing. My mother said that I should never go in the sea. Why not? Well, unfortunately she died before she could tell me why. Oh, said the blue whale. Well, I'll just have a wee swim about and you decide whether or not you want to risk it or not. The blue whale came back in a few minutes. Well, I'm going, said Angus. Right. And the blue whale turned around, grabbed hold of the tail, and Angus did, and away out to sea they went, as fast as that blue whale could drag a big heavy giant. And away out and out they went. But you know, as they kept moving, the whale seemed to go faster. Hey, you're getting the hang of this now, said Angus. Maybe, said the blue whale, shouting back. And on they went, and it was getting easier and easier. Oh Oh my, we're going so fast. Yep, said the blue whale. And eventually an island came in sight, the Isle of Alba. There's the island up ahead. I'll just go in reverse and you go to that beach. Well, Angus was soon on dry land and he felt a bit weird. Has there anything happened to me? Aye, said the blue whale. What? You're about half the size you were. I had a funny feeling. Oh, that's what happens if I'm in seawater. I shrink. Looks like it. Oh no. And the giantess, cheerio, it's the blue whale. Because behind Angus, a huge towering figure had appeared, and a very grim-faced giantess was there. And she looked down at Angus, and Angus smiled his very best smile, and he says, "Hello, are you looking for a husband?" And the giantess, she took one look at Angus, and she roared out of her, "You're no big enough!" And she took him round the middle, and she chucked him back into the sea. Well, fortunately, the blue whale had thought something like that might happen. And the blue whale was there to catch Angus. And Angus grabbed onto the tail. And that blue whale made it back to dry land as fast as it could. And when Angus landed, his clothes literally fell off him. For now, what size am I? About human size. Oh my goodness, says Angus. Find something to cover yourself up, woman. I will. Thanks very much, blue whale. No bother, and thanks for your help, mate. And off the blue whale went. Poor Angus. He just didn't know what to do with himself. Well, he found some bits and bobs, leaves and such like. There were no fig leaves, unfortunately, but there were some docking leaves, and he managed to weave himself a wee skirt. And off he went, and it was a far longer journey back because he wasn't big anymore. But eventually, 4 days later, Morag's cottage was in sight. And Morag, she was outside spinning. And Angus shouted out, "Morag!" And she recognised the voice. She looked up. "Angus, I can't see you. Where are you?" "Down here." And she looked down, and there over the dry stone dyke was a man, same size as her. "Angus, could you find me a wee jacket or something?" "Oh my goodness," she said. "Aye." Well, soon Angus got some clothes on. And Morag asked what happened, and Angus told her the whole story. And Angus said, "You know, Morag, I'm more than happy to be your size. Would you marry me?" And you can imagine what she said. And it wasn't long before they were. And the bairns came along soon after. But I can promise you this, none of them were in the sea to swim, ever. And that's the story of the Lonely Giant. So welcome to those that have arrived since I started. Love you from Fraser. That's lovely, Fraser. And Elaine, you've got back to us. That's fine. And Melissa's nieces are watching. That's really nice. Nice to have you all. So, did anybody get the answer to the riddle? I'll read it one more time. In the air I wander, o'er the sea I glide. On the sand you'll not see me. I'm rarely still, I never hide. Cheyenne, I think you thought that was an albatross. Am I right? That's not the right answer. You'll not see me on the sand, but you can see what I do on the sand. Anybody guess what it might be? I think the replies might be a wee bit delayed. So, thank you very much for your applause and everything. That's very kind. So, shall I give you the answer to that? It's the wind. So, in the air, I wander. O'er the sea, I glide. I think that's what tricked you, Shane. On the sand, you'll not see me. I'm rarely still. I never hide. Well, there you go. That's the wind. So I've got a wee joke for you now. See if you can get this. What paces back and forth on the ocean floor? Again, what paces back and forth on the ocean floor? I'll give you the answer after this story, or you can put up your answers and I'll see them. Let's just see if there's any more comments here. Oh, there's Pam. Hi, Pam. Lovely to have you. Oh, you got it second time, Shane. Well done. And Pete, you're on. That's nice. Cool. So my family have been very kind and come on board for this and are telling me how things are going, which is lovely. So this story takes place just south of Aberdeen. I'm sure some of you have been to Arbroath. It's between here and Dundee. And Arbroath used to be known as Aberbrothok, for the Brothok burn runs through Arbroath. And people were very religious in the past, and many of them would be churchgoers. And the abbot of that time was a very kindly man, well loved in the town. And out at sea, it's 10 miles southeast of Arbroath, there is a rock, and it rises like sharp teeth out the water. It's called Inch Cape Rock. And many, many ships have been lost on the sharp rocks of that rock. Now, when the abbot saw how many people were not surviving because of that rock, he decided something had to be done, because whenever there was a high wind or at night, when you couldn't see very much, people just did not know where that rock was. So he ordered that a bell be made, a huge bell. And onto that bell was tied a thick rope, which was specially protected against salt water. And one calm day, he was seen being taken out to Inch Cape Rock in a rowing boat, along with some fishermen. They landed at Inch Cape Rock, and with a very stout and sturdy pole, they hammered that into the rock so it would not shift, and the bell was placed upon it, and the rope hung down and into the water. And although it was a calm day, the lapping water moving against the rope made that rope go ding, ding, ding. But when that wind got up and the waves got stronger, that bell started to ring out. And you know, so many ships on a stormy day or a really bad night, they could hear the ringing of that bell, and they were warned away from Inch Cape Rock, and it became known as the Bell Rock. But there was one pirate figure who was not impressed. His name was Ralph, and his living was mainly made off the pickings of wrecks, and he had survived on what had been broken on Inch Cape Rock. He also boarded other ships, and he would take wrecks that had gone on shore, but Inch Cape Rock was a favourite place. And now, hardly any ships were being wrecked on the rock, and he was furious. And so what did he do? One calm day, he went to the rock and he cut down the rope, and into the sea it went, never to be seen again. And he rubbed his hands in glee, for now he knew that he would be able to get everything that was wrecked on those rocks. And so it was. It was dreadful to see. And that abbot had died, and another abbot had taken his place, and he was very distressed by this. So he ordered that in the abbey a huge round window be created facing out to sea. It would be known as the Rose Window, and it would be lit every grey day and every dark night, so that ships would know that they were coming near to Inchcape Rock. But it took a long time to build, and in the interim was one of the worst storms of that century in 1799. And Ralph, he and his crew were hanging about hoping for wrecks. But they didn't realise how close they were getting to Inchcape Rock. The waves were tumultuously high, and then one wave took them up and over, and they were smashed on Inchcape Rock itself. And that was the last of Ralph. Well, the abbey lasted a good many years, but eventually it fell into ruin, and wrecks began to accumulate once more. And so it was decided a lighthouse should be built on Inchcape Rock. And Stevenson, it took 4 years to make. Can you imagine trying to get out to that rock in all weathers to put on the foundation and then the building of it? It's an incredible piece of work. On every island it's an incredible piece of work, but in that one in particular. And so that lighthouse still stands today. And if you ever see Inchcape Rock, you now know the stories behind it. So, how are we doing? Oh, what paces back and forth on the ocean floor? Peter said it was a lobster. Sheehan's reckoning it's the tide. Indy doesn't have a clue. Matteo's guessing a wave. So, it's none of them, guys. What paces back and forth on the ocean floor? It's a nervous wreck. What do you think? So, I've now got a riddle for you. This riddle came to me this morning, and I hope you like it. I saw something in my house and it made me think, oh yeah, I can make up a good riddle about that. So here it is. With my feet I move, but cannot run, although a child I am. Some look at me and say, cowardly, but watch, for hurt I can. I'll give you it again. With my feet I move, but cannot run, although a child I am. Some look at me and say, cowardly, but watch, for hurt I can. See if you get that one, guys. Any guesses so far? Oh, hi Margot, nice to see you. And maybe Rio, I don't know who else is there. Oh, Katrina, hello. Nice to see you. Now, I'm glad you liked the joke, by the way, guys. So our next story is about this guy. One day at Woodside Primary, this little bird was lying on the ground, and Alistair came out. He was going home and he saw the little bird and he thought, oh no, it's a dead bird. But suddenly he saw the little bird go, ah! Oh, it's alive. And he picked it up and he ran to his mum and he says, Mum, look, there's a wee birdie. Oh my goodness, I thought it was dead, but it's not. Oh, put it under the buggy and we'll go home. Cameron was in the buggy. So off they went home. And the wee bird is going, oh, help me, I don't know what I am, I've bumped my head, aha. Well, they took it into the house and the wee bird sat up and went, I'm really thirsty, can anybody give me a drink? Oh, what do you think it drinks? Now, I want suggestions during this story, so you have to give me suggestions. So, the wee birdie, oh, let's try it with water, said Mum. So, Alistair got some water and he put it in his hand, and the wee bird took a wee drinky.
Oh, thanks very much, but I'm really hungry as well.
Oh, hungry? Oh no, I wonder what the wee birdie eats. What could a wee birdie eat? Any suggestions? Oh, no suggestions yet. Well, I'll give you one. Well, said Alistair, we feed the birds bird seed, so let's give that a shot. So Mum got some bird seeds and gave it to the wee birdie.
No, oh, yuck, that's disgusting. I don't like that.
Oh, Shane's suggesting a wee dram. Oh, we could try some whiskey. Have some whiskey. Yum, 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 yum. Very nice, thank you very much. But I'm still hungry. What else could I have to eat? Any suggestions? Chips. Okay, Andy says chips. All right. Oh, here we go. Here's some chips for last night. Give that a shotty.
Yuck! No, that's disgusting.
Oh dear. Well, let's see what else is in the fridge. What else is in my fridge? Haggis, says Shane. Okay. Oh yeah, there's some leftover haggis. Try that now. Oh,
Yuck! Oh, no.
Oh dear, this has been a problem. What are we going to do? Oh, a bird eats rubbish. Oh, that's a thought. Okay, maybe I could just... Oh, there's some cheese rind. Let's try that. How about some cheese rind?
No, nothing like that.
Oh, dearie me. Well, I tell you what, I think we need to go to the pet shop, because maybe something in the pet shop will be able to tell us. So off they went to the pet shop. And there in the pet shop, there was a toucan. And the toucan looked at our little bird.
Hello, am I the same as you? Are you a toucan? I don't know.
And the toucan looked at him eyeball to eyeball.
I've got some banana here. Here you go.
So, some banana for the wee bird.
No. You're not a toucan if you don't like banana. And look at your feet. Oh, what about my feet? They're not the same as mine. I've got claws for going on a branch, and you haven't. Oh, I don't know what my feet are for. Well, I have to find out.
Well, they said thank you to Toucan, and off they went. Now, it was very fortunate for them that in their garden they had a very wise owl. Oh, okay. And the owl said, "What's going on?"
I don't know what I am. I bumped my head, and I'm very hungry, and these kind people haven't given me anything I like to eat.
Oh dear, said the owl. Well, looking at you, you're not an owl.
Oh, thank you. You see, you've not got a beak for eating meat. Oh, okay. And your feet, they're for swimming. Oh, for swimming? Yes. Okay, well maybe, can you take me somewhere where there's, what do you call the stuff you swim in? Water. Oh, can you take me to water? So off they went down to the river. And there on the river was a duck. And the duck said, "Hello." Hello, I'm a duck. What are you? I don't know. What do you do when you're a duck?
Well, you swim. Come into the water. Let's see if you are one. So our little bird went into the water. And whee! Oh yes, I'm a duck. I'm definitely a duck. I like the water. But the duck said, well, let's see. Dive under the water because I like eating weed. Oh, that sounds yummy. So they both went whee into the water. And a moment later,
water at all. No, you're not a duck then. Oh, no. What am I? Well, fortunately, just at that moment, a big crow came over. I went, ah, ah. Little bird. Yeah, I think you belong at the sea. Oh, can you take me to the sea? Yeah, we can take you to the sea. This was becoming a bit of a long drawn out process, but anyway, down to the sea they went. Fortunately, it was summer, so the days were long, not like now. And there at the sea there was a gull. Hello, am I the same as you? I don't think so, said the gull. In fact, I don't think you should be on the sand. I think you need a cliff. Oh, said Mum, a cliff. Come on, boys, into the car. We're heading down to beyond Stonehaven. And that's what they did. They travelled a long, long way. And eventually they came to the cliffs. And they went up on the cliffs. And what do you think they found? They found... Have any of you guessed what it is? Do you know what it is? Let's see if anybody has guessed. Don't want to spoil it. This is, I know Olivia's here. Hi Olivia. You know what this is, don't you? You, said this bird, are an awful puffin. Where have you been? I bumped my head and I forgot what I was and I don't know where I was. Oh, well, you're back just as well. Now I'm away for a fish, said the puffin, and off the puffin dived into the water. Oh, is that what I have to do? Yeah, go for it. So the puffin dived down into the sea, and it was away for a wee while. And when it came back up, it had lots of fish in its mouth. Yummy! I like fish, said the puffin. Oh, wow, that's so good. Well, the family were delighted that Puffin was back where Puffin belonged. And you know, the family came to see Puffin quite often because that's a very, very special place where Puffin was. It's called Falls. And here's, can you see this? This is one of the puffins that I've seen. And back a bit. Is that better? Sorry, it's really hard to do this. Can you see what's in its mouth? There's lots of sand eels, and that's what puffins like to eat. And so Falls is a great place because you can see puffins like this, but you can also, these are the cliffs at Falls. Oh, trying to show you stuff. I'm not sure how effective this is. And that is just covered with birds. Loads and loads and loads of them. And you can see, oh, sorry, which side? Oh yeah, up and down here. It's like a high rise. And on that high rise, you get birds like this. You get guillemots. You get razorbills. And very pretty little kittiwakes. Can you see the kittiwake babies there? And down at the bottom, you get these birds nesting, and they're called shags. And at the very top, you get these ones, and these are called fulmars. So it's like they've all got their place, and they're very particular about their place. And I thought we could sing a wee song just now. So what I'm going to do, if I can, is put up the chorus for that song, and you can sing it with me if you choose to. And I'll sing it first. Oh no, that's not working, sorry. When you've not done things like this before, it's called high rise nesting. And let's see, can I get it to come? Right. Can you see that? So I'll just have a wee drink here, getting a wee bit dry here.
High rise nesting, birds are wheeling, birds are stinking. Oh, what a sight to see, birds flying free above the sea. And it really does stink, but it's beautiful to watch, I tell you. So do join in that comment, that if you want. Okay. A high rise for birds of every kind, the pecking order well defined. Shags black-winged o'er the sea, straight-backed fulmars sweep and glide. Join in. High rise nesting, birds are wheeling, birds are stinking. Oh, what a sight to see, birds flying free above the sea. Dark jacket guillemots row on row, blacker still razor bills below. Noisy kittiwakes with pretty young, orange-footed puffins, the seabird clown. Chorus. High rise nesting, birds are wheeling, birds are stinking. Oh, what a sight to see, birds flying free above the sea. Well done. Hope you joined in. So, where are we? Oh, I gave you a wee riddle. Did anybody get the answer? I'll tell you again. With my feet I move, but cannot run, although a child I am. Some look at me and say cowardly, but watch, for hurt I can. Now, oh, some of you joined in the singing. That's great. I hope you did, Shane, as well. Thank you, Virtu. That's great. So, anybody get the answer to that riddle? It's oh, Katrina thought it was wind. It's actually the sea. A sea urchin. A sea urchin. With my feet I move but cannot run. So it's got kind of tubular feet that it moves up a rock. Although a child I am, an urchin is a child. Some look at me and say cowardly. It's got no backbone, you see. But watch, for hurt I can. Did you know that an urchin is an old name for a hedgehog? And that's exactly what a sea urchin looks like. It looks like a hedgehog. So there you go. Play on words. I've got another joke for you. Are you ready? What did the sea say to the sand? What did the sea say to the sand? And the answer is going to be after this next story. Now, I promised you a smuggler tale. And smugglers, the reason smugglers came about mostly was when fishing became more restricted. In the small villages up and down the coast, and I'm talking all through the land, people relied on fishing to bring in an income. But as time passed, the fishing boats increased in size and the way of fishing changed. And instead of lines on which were lots and lots and lots of hooks that had to be baited with mussels and all the rest of it, they had nets, drift nets, which would drift behind the ships and catch loads more fish. But these ships couldn't come into the small villages and the small harbours, and so the small harbours began to lose out. And some people turned to smuggling as a way to supplement their income. And Colliston was one of those places. Colliston is a little place north of Aberdeen, and it's a lovely wee village, and it's an awful lot of holiday houses now, but it used to be jam-packed with small fishing boats. And they used to have a speciality there called Colliston Speldings. And these were salted, sun-dried haddock or whiting, which were, they were absolutely delicious. And they were sent off down to the south of England, and they were treated as a delicacy. But with the fishing changing, a lot of the villagers started to rely on the smuggling side of things. And the excise men were the ones who were always looking for where the smugglers were at work. And so the smugglers had to be very, very canny how they went about things. Now, this particular pair of brothers, Philip and John Kennedy, they were farmers. They stayed on the Ward farm, which you'll see a signpost for it if you're up that way. And Philip, was the brains beside the smuggling that went on around Colliston. Things would be brought in like brandy, gin, whiskey, and unusual things were brought into Aberdeen actually. 1721 in November, there were things like writing paper and prunes and raisins and other things like that. Soap, what else? Oh, and tea was very popular as well. In Colliston, the particular thing that was brought in this particular time was gin. And because no big ships could get into harbour, the big ships would anchor offshore, and then a small boat would go out to meet the big boat, and all the goods would be transferred to the small boat. But things had to be prepared on land. Now, the kind of weather you look for as a smuggler is this horrible weather, when the light is rubbish and hardly anybody's out because of the lashing rain. And I want you to imagine on this particular day, there's 4 men hard at work on the sand. They've got 2 sails and they're digging out the sand, and the top sand is placed on one sail. And then the wetter sand is placed on another sail. And a hole deep enough that the 6-foot prodders that were used by the excise man to test the sand, it had to be below that things were buried. So it was a big hole, and there was lots of gin being brought in that night. So as the gin was going to come that night, they had to have the hole ready. Dreadful weather. So there was nobody about, but there was always a watchman on the lookout. And that night the signal came from the ship. It was known as the Crooked Mary, and a small rowing boat was sent out, and back it came, well laden with barrels and barrels of gin. And those 4 men had to carry those barrels. Well, they carried them off, and then they were able to roll them gently along the sand and then carefully lower them down into the hole. Eventually all of the barrels were in. Then the wet sand was put on top, and then the dry sand. The dry sand went on top so that it wouldn't look any different from the rest of the beach. And once that was done, the tired men returned home for well-deserved rest. But the following night was an even tougher one, because then the whole village was involved. The cart wheels had to be covered in rags so they would make no noise on the road. Horses' hoofs had to have rags put on them as well, so there would be no sound. And everything was done by signal, by whistle, and as silent as possible. Oh, it was as dark as sin that night. And the 4 men, well, they had to do the opposite of what they'd done the night before and dig down to those barrels. Oh, the rain and the wind lashing down. Well, eventually they struck the barrels, and one by one the barrels were lifted up, and then it was a chain of people up the cliff to where the carts were waiting. And eventually all the barrels were up to the top and in the carts, and along the road they went as silently as possible. But when they came to the graveyard, suddenly lanterns that had been hidden were opened out, and the whole of the gang were showing up. Well, most of them ran for it, but not Philip and John. They stayed put, and immediately they brought out their heavy sticks which had metal at either end, and they started lashing out at the excisemen. John was hit and he was down and out of it, and Philip, he's lashing away, and he managed to get two men down, and he grabbed them and he said to the other one, he says, "You better head off, man, or these two are in for trouble." Well, the last man, he was very brave, and he was very scared, but he drew out his sabre and he said, "Look who's going to get cut, nobody but you." And he came forward and he went for Philip, and he cleaved his head until the blood was rushing out, and Philip fell down to the ground like a stone. Well, the men, they quickly scuttled away with those carts, because none of the villagers would be happy that they had gotten what they had been so hard to obtain. Well, Philip, he did waken from a dead faint, and the blood had poured out down the rainy road, and he picked himself up and he managed to drag himself over to the nearest farm. Well, he was brought in and put onto the settle, and he was bandaged up, but he'd lost too much blood. And in the early light of morning, his face was grey, and he opened his eyes one last time and said, "If folk had been brave enough, we would have won the day, and I would not be dead." And with that, he closed his eyes. So that was a sad story, but the ship, that's the Crooked Mary, as I say, she was out in deeper water, and as soon as she dropped her cargo, she went even deeper out into the sea, because if you were into a certain point, the excisemen could get you. So immediately the ship had gone further out to sea, and they were all having a wee dram, quite happy with themselves because they'd got the money for all that gin. And they hardly heard the ship, the cutter, approaching them. This was the king's man. His name was Captain Eyre. And before they knew it, the sailors had boarded, and they took them all and said, "You are under arrest." For what? They said. "You can't arrest us for anything." Well, they were taken to court, and sure enough, nobody from Colliston was going to come forward as a witness to the Crooked Mary crew. And so Captain Eyre went further inland to see if he could grab anybody. "Oh, aye, sir, I did. I saw a boat offshore." And the judge said, "How could you do that if your village hasn't even a sight of the sea?" And another one said, "Oh, aye, sir, I saw a Crooked Mary come right into shore." "Well, you don't know boats then," said the judge. So even though there was nobody who witnessed Crooked Mary, the judge decided that they should be punished, and the ship was taken off them and given to Captain Eyre. And you know what he did? He sold it back to those people. And so it went on. Money and dealings, money and dealings. Life hasn't changed very much at all. So that is the story for you from Colliston tonight, or this afternoon. Now, where are we? Oh, I gave you another wee joke, didn't I? Let's see. Anybody got the joke? Oh, Peter, you got it. So I'll tell you again. What did the sea say to the sand? Nothing. It just waved. I bet you looked that up online. And Pete said, "Why did the sand blush?" Because it saw the sea weed. So there you go. Dearie me. It was a sad story, Sheehan. And unfortunately, there was a lot of sad stories around that time. But a funny thing would be that some of the smugglers, would dress up as women. And so when the excisemen saw women, they thought that they would, manage to overcome them, and then got a real surprise when they proved to be quite brawny and able to look after themselves. So where are we? Oh, well, the story I have for you now is, am I going to give you another? Oh, I was going to give you another riddle, sorry. Let me see. Oh yeah, okay. I'm home to many. My belly is vast. My face can be calm or furrowed with rage. I beckon with whispers or command with a roar, while my breath surges constantly in and out. So that's quite an easy one, guys. I'm sure most of you are going to get it. Indy, I like true stories best as well. Mind you, all my stories are true, so I don't know actually what you're saying there. Hey. So I don't know if you can see behind me. I just need to check that you can actually. Shane's very kindly commented on the felt, but in front of the felt I have a boat that you can maybe see, and up here on the wall I've got my goonie, my dressing gown. Now this dressing gown is very old. My great-grandfather brought it back for my great-grandmother from China, and it's made of silk, and it's very cool in summer and cosy in winter, and there's a beautiful dragon on it. I'm not going to take it down because it'd be a bit awkward, but it's lasted very, very well. Now my great-grandfather was a merchant seaman. His name was John Tupman, and this is actually his creation. He made this ship. And I've also got a little wooden bookcase, a circular bookcase, which is lovely, and he made that as well. So I'm very pleased to have those things. He went all over the world in his travels, and I thought it was time for us to have a story from the other side of the world. This story comes all the way from Russia. Once there was a man who had 3 sons. He was a merchant, and for those that don't know what a merchant is, that's somebody who would sell things, for those children that don't know. And he had ships. Now his 2 older sons, they grew up to be hard-working and diligent, and when they were of an age, he gave his sons ships and filled them with goods and said to them, "Go, make your fortune." But the youngest, whose name was Ivan, he said to his father, "And what about me, father?" And his father turned to him and said, "Ivan, you're a ninny. You've never done a stroke of work in your life. I'm not giving you a ship." "Oh, father!" Well, he pleaded and he pleaded, a bit like a dripping tap. And eventually his mother said, "Please, husband, give him a ship." "Very well, I will give him a ship." And so he was given a toty ship like this. And inside this ship there were not goods for sale, but rags. And the crew were old sailors well past their sell-by date. But his father said, "Go, Ivan, let's see how you get on." And Ivan was so happy. "Father, thank you so much," he said. "I promise I will do you proud." And off they went. Now those old sailors knew a thing or two, and Ivan treated them with such respect. And in Russia, if you treat your elders with respect, you call the sailors "my children." And so he said, "My children, please travel into the wide ocean and let us see what we can find." And so they did. They went on and on into the great wide ocean, and they met with a dreadful storm. And that little boat was tossed and turned, and its sails, for what they were ripped to shreds. And eventually, when that storm blew itself out, they saw a little island ahead. And so the sailors, they all rowed with their old muscles to shore and put down the anchor. well relieved to be on dry land. "Well," said Ivan, "my little children, please, can you take all the rags out, and can you please make new sails with those rags?" "Very well," they said, "for if you're a sailor, you are very good at stitching." And off Ivan went to explore. Through woods and jungle-like fronds he went, until he came to an open place where there was a huge white mountain, and he was so hot he thought, "Oh, it's snow," and he began to climb, and he took some snow and he put it in his mouth and spat it back out. Wasn't snow, it was salt. "Oh," said Ivan. "Oh, salt." Now in those days and in those times, salt was a very precious commodity, and you could sell it for a lot of money. And so he rushed down the mountain, rushed through the wood and back to shore. "Oh, my children, leave the rags. I need you to get buckets. We have to fill up our little ship with salt." Oh, that was hard work, but they did it. And soon that ship was riding low in the water. It was so heavy with salt. The rags made the most cheerful of sails, and they were put up, and what a merry ship left that shore. Well, they travelled on until they came to a land that they knew nothing about. And they put down the anchor, and then Ivan, he took a little bit of salt in a bag, tied it up, put it in his pocket, and off he went up to the castle that stood on the hill. And he knocked on the door and asked if he would be allowed to see the king. And he was brought in before the king, and the king said, "Yes, I'm a merchant, your majesty, and I have brought you something to sell." "Oh," said the king, and he brought out the little bag, opened it up, and he poured some salt into his hand. "What do you mean? What's that?" "It's salt, your highness." "Oh, throw it away. I don't want stuff from the ground, thank you very much." And the king dismissed him. Well, Ivan was most put out, but he did not leave. He went round the back of the castle to the kitchen door, knocked on it, and he said, "Oh, do you mind? I'm so tired. Could I just come in and have a little rest, please?" And so they let him have a stool. Oh, they were so busy making the dinner. There was servants running this way and that way, and big stews and soups and vegetables all cooking. But at one point, every servant had to dash out to go and get dishes. And while they were out, what do you think our Ivan did? Every single pot, he went round and put a little bit of salt in every one, for he'd not seen any salt used, and he was most perturbed. And then he was back on his seat when they all came back in. The food was laden out onto the platters and taken up to the king. And the king and queen, they started to eat the soup first off. And the king, he started eating slowly, and then quicker and quicker. And the queen and everybody at the table, oh, it's the most delicious soup I've ever had. And then they were on to the fish course and the meat course and vegetables and whatever else. And they had such an appetite. And the servants were all saying, "Oh, this is lovely, they're all eating for a change," because normally they were quite not very interested in their food, but every plate was scraped clean, not an item left. "Well," said the king, "oh, that was delicious. Now, can you bring the cook up, please?" And the cook came up. "Cook, that was a most sumptuous and tasty meal, thank you." Oh, says the cook, "I'm delighted you enjoyed it, your majesty. What did you do differently?" The cook looked and went, I have done nothing differently, your majesty." Oh, and he asked each one of the servants, and the servants went, "Has there been anything different about today than there has been to any other day?" And one servant
Excuse me, Your Majesty.
Yes, it's just a young lad. There was a man in, and he's not been in the kitchen before. Oh, now was there, said the king. Send that man to me. And immediately Ivan was taken up to be before the king once more. And the king looked at Ivan and said, Young man, did you do anything to the food I ate tonight? And Ivan grinned. I did, Your Majesty. What did you do? You know that white stuff I showed you earlier that you thought was just rubbish? That's what I put in. Oh, said the king. I must have this. How much do you have? My whole ship is full of it. Well, I must have it all. Oh, really? Yes, and how much will this cost? I think for every bag or bucket of salt, I must have 3 buckets, one of gold, one of silver, and one of jewels. Very well, said the king, without hesitation, immediately. And so the sailors, they now had to empty the salt out and take it all the way up the hill to the castle. But when they came back down, their faces were grinning because they knew they'd get their wages and more. Well, they were delighted. Now, the king had a very bonny daughter. And the king turned to Ivan and said, My daughter's got a question to ask you. And the daughter said, May I see your boat? Oh, of course, said Ivan. Come away. And so the princess and her maids came down to the boat. Oh, it's such a lovely little boat. May we come on board? Well, the sailors helped the princess and her maids on board, and they exclaimed at the pretty sails made of rags. There were so many different colours. And then she said, What's making this stay still? Oh, so one of the sailors, that's the anchor. Can I see your pretty anchor? Said the princess. And so the sailor, obliging, pulled up the anchor and showed it to the princess. And just at that moment, a wind began to blow, and the ship, very gently, was taken out of harbour and out to sea. And when the princess looked back, she saw the shore vanishing. No, take me home, take me home. Oh, said Ivan, I'm terribly sorry, but the wind's taking us this way. We can't turn back. Oh, said the princess, crying. But Ivan, he reassured her. And when the princess looked into Ivan's beautiful brown eyes, she wasn't sad anymore. And the days passed, and do you know, the princess and Ivan were very, very fond of each other, to the point that Ivan said to her, Would you be willing to marry me? And she was very happy to say yes. So they travelled on, and as they got nearer to their home shore, they saw 2 great ships approaching. It was the brothers returning. Well, Ivan hailed his brothers, and the brothers saw the little ship, and they drew alongside. And they exchanged stories, and Ivan introduced his future bride and showed them all the jewels and riches that he got. And the brothers went a wee shade of green because they'd not done nearly as well. And that night, with smiles to their brother and frowns behind his back, they had a wee natter to each other. What about you have the princess and I have all the riches? How would that do? Yep. And so the brothers agreed that's what would happen. And in the dead of night, when Ivan was walking his ship, the 2 brothers came up behind him and threw him over the side. Well, they took that boat and headed home and said that the goods were their own. And the princess was theirs too. And what of our poor Ivan? Well, Ivan was furious. He'd managed to grab hold of a piece of wood, but for the next 3 days he was sailing in the ocean, and he was so thirsty, he was so hungry. But eventually he came to another shore. And when he came onto the beach, after a bit of a rest, he managed to crawl up the bank, and there before him was a ginormous castle, and in it a big giant. And the giant saw Ivan and said, "You've not had much luck, lad." "Oh, have you seen? Your brothers, wicked they are. And I tell you what, I've got a very far-seeing eye. Your brother's getting married to your future bride tomorrow morning." "No," said Ivan, "I have to get there." "That's no problem," said the giant. And so he picked Ivan up in his hand. 3 strides, that's all it took him to get across the sea. And he dropped Ivan down. He says, "Don't you dare say a word about me. It'll be the worse for you." "Oh," said Ivan, "my mouth is sealed. Thank you so much." And away bombed up to his father's house. And sure enough, there was the wedding in progress, but vows had not been exchanged. And he burst upon them. And the poor wan princess, she looked up and her cheeks went rosy. "Ivan," she said, and she ran to his arms. And Ivan told father the whole story. Well, the brothers were out in their ear, tell you that. And Ivan and the princess got married. But you know, the drink was flowing that night. And as the drink started to flow, everybody started to brag about what they were good at. And Ivan, eventually, it just fell out of his mouth. He says, "I was brought back by a giant." And at that, the giant was there. He says, "I told you not to mention me, and you did." "Oh," says Ivan, "I'm terribly sorry, but it was the drink." "The drink?" said the giant. "Aye, look, take a barrel of this." Now, a barrel to a human was a wee bit like a thimble to a giant. A barrel of whiskey. It was down that giant. And then a barrel of wine and a barrel of mead. All the same way. And the giant started to feel a wee bit lightheaded. And then, thunk, he landed on the ground. Dearie me. He was out for 3 days. When he woke up, his head was stotting, and he'd knocked down a whole forest when he fell. And the giant looked round. He says, "Who made that mess? That's what drink does." "Oh," said the giant, "I'm no touching another drop." "Very well, Ivan, I'll let you off." And off he strode back o'er the sea to his own island and was never seen again. And Ivan and his princess lived happily for the rest of their days. And that's the story of salt. Now, what did I tell you? It was a wee riddle, wasn't it? I'm home to many, my belly is vast, my face can be calm or furrowed with rage. I beckon with whispers or command with a roar, while my breath surges constantly in and out. And Nikki has got this one. It is the sea. That's right. That was quite a hard riddle to make up, I tell you. Now, let me see, what have we got next? We have another joke. What do you call a crab in self-isolation? I'll leave you with that one just now. What do you call a crab in self-isolation? Now, so I've got another wee story. Oh, you like that one, Louisa? Good. I'm glad. One day I was down at the beach on a much bonnier day than this, and it was when my wee dog Bertie was still around. And it was low tide and Bertie was running along the sand, and then suddenly he stopped and he started bark, 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 and then he picked something up in his mouth and he was running with it. And I thought, oh, what's he got? Because you know dogs. So I went running after him, which was quite tricky in those days because he was quite fast. And there I could see in his mouth he actually had a hermit crab. Oh no, that's dreadful. Oh, I've got it upside down, sorry, Hermie. I said to Bertie, put it down, drop, and eventually Bertie put it down. Oh, wee hermit crab, I'm so sorry, are you okay?
I think I'm all right. I think so.
Oh, you poor thing. Now, let me just get you back to your rock pool. What were you doing out your rock pool?
I was just having a wee dander.
Oh dear, well, I saw a rock pool further ahead. I says, is it that one?
Aye, that'll
fine. So I put the wee hermit crab in, and it sank down into the rock pool, quite happy with itself. And then it came back up, and it says, "What's your name?" "Oh, I'm Grace." "Well, if you come here tomorrow between high tide and low tide, I've got something for you." "Oh," I said, "but don't bring your dog." "Oh, okay, I won't bring my dog." So next day I went back down, and there was the rock pool, and there was Hermit on the side. "Now," says Hermit, "Grace, stand up in the rock pool and close your eyes." So I did. "Now count to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, I said, and I opened my eyes. And the weirdest thing had happened. I'd shrunk. And now I was the same size as Hermit. "Oh, Hermit, what have you done?" "I gave you a present. Just till low tide. Once the tide turns, you'll turn back into your normal size." "Oh, wow. Look at the rock pool now." And I looked at the rock pool. It was a swimming pool. "It's lovely and warm," said Hermit. "And there at the bottom, I could see a wee crab. Go down and say hello to all the creators in the pool then. They'd love to meet you." So I dived in. Now, I wasn't that great a swimmer, but it was so warm and salty that it pulled me right up to the surface, and I was so happy. And there was something I'd never seen before. A little seahorse. The seahorse went, "Hi, Grace." "Hi. Would you like a race?" "Oh, okay." So me and the seahorse, we started racing to the other side of the rock pool and then back again. Guess who won? Seahorse. But I enjoyed it very much. And then I got to meet a little sea snail. And the sea snail started showing me around where the anemones were and where the shells were and all the barnacles. But the sea snail went up and over to show me some nice seaweed, when all of a sudden it let out a cry, and it came back, and there was a great big cut in its side. "Oh, sea snail, what's happened to you?" "I don't know," said sea snail, "but I'm bleeding." "You are." The water was turning black with the snail's blood. "Quick, go and get Lobster." Well, I had no idea where Lobster was. "Under the seaweed at the bottom." Now you have to excuse this lobster because it should be blue. But I went down and I went, "Hello, Lobster, are you there?" And out from underneath the seaweed came a very angry looking lobster. "What do you want?" Sea snail's hurt." And I looked at those pincers and they looked very sharp. "Where's sea snail?" "Up the top." "So go on my back." So I climbed onto Lobster's back and up to the surface we went, and there was sea snail. "Oh, mighty me," says Lobster, "that's nae fine at a'. Right, I'll away. I've got a wee fishing hook I found the other day, and there's some fishing line, so we'll get you sorted, sea snail, no bother." So down went Lobster and came back up with a fish hook, and threaded on was some fishing line. And very deftly, that clever Lobster tidied up that wound until it was all closed. "Thank you very much, Lobster." "No bother, sea snail. Go and have a wee rest, mate." So sea snail went off for a wee rest. "Thanks, Grace, for letting me know, but don't bother me again." "Oh, all right, Lobster." And Lobster went back down and hid again under the seaweed. Well, just at that moment, there was a wee cry fae Hermit. "Grace, get back to the edge of the rock pool. That's the tide beginning to turn." So I rushed up to the edge of the rock pool, and just in time, whoop, and I was back to my normal size. "Oh," I said, kneeling down, "Hermit, thank you for letting me go in there and meet all your pals. And sea snail, I hope you're all right." Well, I thought I'd better check to see what sea snail had cut itself on. And I went round the other side of that rock pool, and can you guess what I found? It's a broken bottle. Well, I didn't have a black bag with me that day, guys, but from then on, I always made sure that when I went down the beach, I had a black bag with me. And nowadays, gloves as well, just to protect myself from COVID. So that's the story of the rock pool. Now, we had, what did I tell you now? Did I give you another one? Oh yeah, what you call a crab in isolation. Did anybody get that one? A crab in isolation?
There's no way.
It should be very easy after the story I just told you. A hermit crab. So there you go. Now, I've got another riddle for you. My song is mournful, my journeying deep. Each day I hunt, and on shore I sleep. I'll give it to you again. My song is mournful, my journeying deep. Each day I hunt, and on shore I sleep. Right, have a guess at that, Ian, guys. Now, my relatives were originally from up in the northwest of Scotland, up in Sutherland. But during the clearances, they were kicked out to make way for sheep and were shoved onto the east coast to a place called Bad Bay. And it is as bad as it sounds because it's very, very steep. And the houses just clung onto the side. And they had to tie the hens and the children down in bad weather. That was how bad it was. And from being farming folk and looking after the land, they had to learn about the sea. Now, as time went on, they moved further south. And this story is about one of my relatives called Sandy Mackay, and he lived in Helmsdale. And Sandy, he worked in a cooperage. And a cooperage is where barrels are made. And at that time, barrels were needed not just for whiskey, but for herring. Because herring was a very popular fish to be catching at that time. So the order came from Aberdeen that the fish were to be taken from Helmsdale all the way down. And, cheerio, Wendy. Nice to have you. Thanks for coming. Enjoy your wet walk if it is wet with you. And in 1861, that ship set sail into the worst storm of that century. The fishing boats were just thrown about by the weather. And the vessel that Mackay was on, all the barrels had been tied down very, very tightly. But in that kind of weather, it made no difference at all. And the waves swept the barrels away into the water. The mast got shattered, and they were just driven by that wind and weather south. And there was nothing they could do. And they just clung on to any rope they could and cried out to God for mercy. Now, back at home, Belle in Helmsdale was so worried. There was no word, there was no texts in those days, I tell you. And even getting word in any way was very, very hard. But one of their friends for the church had come to give her comfort. And he'd gone into the wee side room to pray. And he came back through and he says, Belle, they're fine, they're all safe. And Belle said, what do you mean? He says, well, Psalm 107, it says, they reeled and staggered like drunken men, but God lifted them into safe harbour. I believe those men are safe. And what do you think happened to those men? Well, one of those great waves coming towards that ship lifted it so high up they could see the harbour wall dead ahead of them. But instead of slamming them into the harbour wall, it was up and over and down. At Lossiemouth, they all arrived in one piece. And Sandy's hair had gone from dark to white. But apart from that, and being a very shaken man, Belle was delighted to welcome him home. And that, guys, is a true story. Now, did you get that riddle? Let me give it to you again. My song is mournful, my journeying deep. Each day I hunt, and on shore I sleep. That is a seal. And I thought I could maybe teach you a seal song. This was taught me by Christine Kidd. And it is said that if you sing this song, then the seals will come to you. Well, I've tried it and I've wondered, but I'm not absolutely convinced it works. But you can give it a shotty. Goes like this. Hunda, hundo, hunda, rodada. Hunda, hundo, hunda, rodada. Hayundunda, 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 rodada. Hayundunda, 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 rodada. Do you want to give a shot? Start at the top. Hunda, hundo, hunda, rodada. Hunda, hundo, hunda, rodada. Hayundunda, 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 rodada. Hayundunda, 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 rodada. I heard you all. That was beautiful. Well done, everybody. Does anybody know what this is? Anybody tell me? I wonder if you know. I'll tell you after the next story. And the next story is about a seal. When seals are young, as you may be aware, they look like this. They are white and fluffy and gorgeous. And just to tell you, this particular seal was on the Isle of May, and I was very, very fortunate to get as close as I am to my computer. And what had happened was I was working on the Isle of May. This is a little island between Fife and, on the Forth, so between Fife and Lothian, thank you. And on the Isle of May, they do some wonderful work looking after some of the birds I showed you earlier. And in the autumn time, right now actually, the seals take over the island. And, like boats come and visit, but not during seal time because it is just mobbed with seals. But this was before the seals had taken over completely. And I was allowed to go and see if I could find one of the babies. Now I saw the mother, and the mother was looking at me, and I looked at her, and she went up this little bit of, like the water coming in from the sea. I could see it went round, and off she went. So I followed her, and as soon as she saw I'd followed her, she went somewhere else. And she did this 3 or 4 times and watched me with her big, big black eyes. And eventually I thought, I'm not going to find the baby. And off I went. But just as I was heading back, I saw something that I thought was rubbish. It was bright white, and it was the baby. And I went up to it, and it was beautiful, but it was snarling at me, so I didn't get very close. So this baby would be fed by its mother initially with the fatty milk that she could provide. And within a few weeks, that baby would have put on so much weight and fat that it would be able to go into the sea. Our stormy, stormy seas over winter are not very kind, but that's what our seals end up going into from a very young age. Now, the particular seal I'm going to tell you about, I've called Sula. And Sula, like all the other pups, was white. And they gathered on the rocks together, and they were fed by their mothers, and then the mothers would go and catch fish and would come back. But when it came time for the babies to start, the pups to start going into the sea, they were starting to lose their beautiful white fur, and in its place would be different colours, so many colours. There'd be browns and greys and almost blacks and some spotted. But Sula remained white. And his eyes were not dark, his eyes were red. And as it is with many creatures, because Sula was different, they started to reject her. And they would bite at Sula, and they would nip, and eventually Sula would swim off by himself. And he would try to come back in, but nobody wanted him. And if he was going after fish, another seal would go for it and bite him in return. And Sula got fed up of this very, very quickly and decided he'd be better off on his own. So Sula travelled and eventually found a rocky area where there were no other seals. And there Sula made his home. Now, time passed, and although it was lonely, Sula liked the isolation. Now, into those waters would come fishing vessels, and Sula would just curry down into the rocks whenever a ship or a vessel would pass. But this particular day, David had set out in his fishing boat, desperate for a catch, but knowing that the weather was unsettled. Well, the weather became more than unsettled, and his fishing boat, although it had a motor, it was not responding. The wind and the waves took his little boat and pushed him further and further out to sea. And the rocks where Sula was on stood up, sharp and dangerous. And that little boat, heading straight for those rocks, was rammed right into those teeth and broke up into smithereens. And David was flung from the boat, and he hit his head and landed on the rocks. Sula came back from fishing, and the storm was still raging, to find there was a strange smell on his rocks. And he looked around and found this strange creature. David was wearing his yellow oilskins, and the smell of him was very peculiar. And David had just come into consciousness and agony, for his leg was at a very, very peculiar angle, and he had a raging thirst, and he groaned, and Sula moved back. But he could do no more than groan. He couldn't move at all. And eventually Sula plucked up courage and came closer. And David lifted up his eyes and saw two great red eyes looking into his. He got an awful fright. He thought he was hallucinating. But Sula, he sensed something about David, and off he went into the water. And when the seal returned, in his mouth were two great fish, and Sula placed them just by the man's mouth. And David managed to move one of his arms, and greedily he sank his teeth into the raw fish, and he sucked and sucked the juices of it, and it managed to quench some of his thirst. And then, without thinking, he just ate into that raw fish, and then he fell back into unconsciousness. The pain was so great. For 3 days he lay there, the water just hammering down on top of him. But Sula tried to cover his body with his own. But eventually the winds died down, and rescue vessels came out seeking David and his small fishing boat. Well, 2 of his friends had come out in one boat, and they came sailing past the rocks. And to their dismay, they saw the boy from David's boat. It was a very vivid boy. It was bright red and had a big D on it. And they cried out with horror. And then they saw the white seal leaving. Well, they went around the rock to see if they could see the seal again. And it was at that point they saw the yellow oilskins. Well, they tied their boat up and they clambered up the rocks, and David was just alive. His leg was completely shattered, and with great difficulty they managed to get him back into their boat and away back to shore. Sula, he waited and waited for so long to see if that man would ever return. But the days, the weeks, and the months passed. David was in hospital for a good month with that leg, and it was another year before he was back in his boat. And he was much more careful about the weather. But this day, blue sky, blue sea, good forecast, he headed back out. And there he found the rocks. And Sula saw the boat coming and hunkered down. But David tied up his boat and clambered up. It was a bit clumsy. That leg would never be back to what it was, onto the rocks. And he cried out, "Halloo, halloo." And Sula lifted up his nose and smelled the man. Well, rather than climb around the rocks, Sula went into the water and came around and came up behind David. And David heard him, turned round, and there was Sula. Well, the two were fast friends for the rest of their time. And Sula often followed David's boat and would place a few fish into his boat in friendship. And David loved to be with Sula, for there was one friend who had saved his life. And that's the story of Sula. Had I given you another riddle? I don't think I did I? Or was it? Oh no, I didn't. Okay, here's one more riddle for you. Water within water, I gracefully dance, Medusa of the sea. Oh, thanks, Sheehan and number 2. That's very kind. Glad you enjoyed the story. And sorry, I'm getting a wee bit tired. You know, it's quite a long time to be sitting in front of a screen just telling stories. But it's lovely to be with you all. So yes, that little riddle again. Water within water, I gracefully dance, Medusa of the sea. Anybody guess that one? Now, oh, I told you, that was this I showed you, wasn't it? I asked you what this was. Did anybody guess? I don't think anybody responded. Well, I was very fortunate to work on a little island off Colonsay called Oronsay. And it's fantastic for bird watching. And basically it's a bird reserve. And one day in the summer, at very, very low tide, you can go across to another tiny island called Rona. And that day I went across with some other people to see what treasures we could find. Now, Ellie, who was with us that day, she found treasures of her own. She found a rotting heron skull, and I think it was a great black-backed skull, I think. And I found this. This is a bone from a whale. The whale had died on the rocks and only the bones were left. And this is from the backbone. And this was where the spinal cord would go through, just through here. So you never know what you find, guys, on the beach. So another story. Oh yeah. This story comes from Shetland, and it was told by Lawrence Tulloch, who's now passed on. But he didn't tell me the story. I was told it by another man called Stanley Robertson. And this was Stanley's version of the story that he told to me. Fish was what people mainly lived on. And in this wee house with 5 children, it was a very important part of their diet. But their father, sadly, had been lost at sea, and Mally, the mother, was left to look after her brood with very little to go on. The barrel that had been stoppit full of herring was now nearly empty, and the oatmeal, it was nearing empty as well, and there was no money to refill. It's terrible. And this one day, Mally looked at her bairns and she said, "Bairns, we need to ask for help." Now, next door there lived one woman by herself, and she was quite well to do. She had enough food for an army. And so it was the children were sent next door to see if she would give them some food. Well, they went to her door and they knocked, and Mrs. Peady opened the door. And she went, "What do you want?" "Oh, Mrs. Peady, please, we are so hungry. Please, could you give us some food?" And she turned to them and she went, "I don't have any food to give you. Away with you!" and slammed the door in their faces. Well, the children began to cry because their tummies, they knew that tomorrow would be the last food, and they so needed to eat. Well, when they came back to the house, they told their mother what the old woman had said, and she said, "Well, we'll just have to make do, children." That night, it was the scrapings from the barrels. She managed to use the salt water and some of the rest of the oatmeal, and she made little fish balls for them, but there was no fish in it. It just tasted of fish, and it was down in a moment and gone. Well, the children, they all fell asleep, weary, with their tummies still empty. And Mally was sat by the fire, and she was sewing, when there was a wee knock at the door. And she went and she opened the door, and there was a wee mannie. And the wee mannie said, "Mally? Oh, hello. Can I come in?" "Oh, you're welcome." So the wee man came in and he perched on Mally's stool. He says, "Have you got my supper?" "Oh," says Mally, "I'll do my best." Well, she went to the barrels, and honestly, it really was the very last scrapings of oatmeal from the corners of the barrel and the last of the salt water, and she made it into a bannock, and she put it over the fire, and she started to cook it. And the smell of it, oh, her tummy was rumbling. And she watched as that bannock began to cook. It began to grow in size, And as she turned it over, she couldn't quite believe it was the same thing she'd put on the griddle. And when she took it off with a cloth and she gave it to the wee man grinned. He went, "Oh, this looks delicious." And crumb by crumb, he ate every last morsel. And he wiped his hands with the cloth. "Thank you, Mally," he said, giving the cloth back. "I wish you well." And off he went, out the door. "Oh," said Mally, "I better away and get some more peats for the morning." Because peat was the fuel that they used for their fire. And behind the house there was a stack of these square bits of peat that she gathered into her wheelbarrow and brought round, and then into her creel and into the house. And she stacked them by the fire to dry off, and then carefully she raised up two and put them like this, and the third one she broke in half to crumble onto the fire. And as she did, something fell onto the stone floor. It was glowing and shining and round. She picked it up. It was a gold coin, and she put it in her. It was real. It was a gold coin. She couldn't believe her eyes. There would be food for the bairns the next day. She was so happy. Well, the next morning when she woke the children up, there before them, they had porridge for breakfast. Well, Molly, away to make the fire bigger, she broke another couple of peats, and what fell out of them rolled across the floor. The children squealed. It was more gold coins. And after that, every peat that Molly broke open had a gold coin, and they were never to go hungry again. But what of the neighbour? Now, the neighbour was a greedy woman, and she saw the children rosy-cheeked, fattened up, and Molly looking happy and relaxed, food always on the table, and she wondered how this could be. And she decided she would spy on them. And she watched the children go round to the back of the house with a wheelbarrow and come back loaded with peats, take the peats in the creel and into the house. And she watched as they broke open the peats, and she saw them, a gold coin in every one. Well, she deserved some gold as well, did she not? So that night she took her own wheelbarrow and she went and stole some of Molly's peats, never to be done. Took them back to her own place, put them in her own creel and into the house. And then she broke open the first one. A gold coin did not come out. Instead, a great big black rat. "Ah!" she screamed, and it went running into her scullery where all the food was. "Oh, bad luck," she said, and she opened another one. And what was inside? Another black rat. Every one she opened, there were black rats in every one, and soon there was a whole swarm of them, and they ate up every morsel of food. No matter how much food she bought, they ate that food. And she began to get thin and wan, and eventually one day she came to Molly's door and knocked. And one of the children opened the door and saw the old woman there and said, "Yes." "Oh, please, could I beg a morsel of food for you?" And the child looked sternly at the woman and said, "You didn't share with us. Why should we share with you?" And closed the door. And Molly on the other side went, "What did you say?" "I just told her she didn't share with us, so we won't share with her." "That's not what we do," said Molly. And she went, she opened the door and she welcomed the old woman in, and she gave her her supper. We treat everybody with kindness. And so that old woman lived comfortably with Molly for the rest of her days. And that's called Molly and the Peats. And I know it's a bit different to Lawrence's version, but cheers to Lawrence and cheers to Stanley for a great wee story. Lisa, you thought this last riddle was an octopus. Let me read it again. Water within water, I gracefully dance, Medusa of the sea. And I guess it's the tentacles you thought was octopus. Well, water within water, I discovered jellyfish are 97% water. And jellyfish are the last phase of this particular creature, which I cannot pronounce in Latin, that starts off as a tiny polyp on a rock and grows and then becomes a form in the water and grows to become the jellyfish we know. And that's the phase where they have their sexual production and then they die and we find the remains on the beach. And that's the phase is known as the Medusa phase. Yes, Wendy, you got it. Well done. So I think I must be a bit ahead of you guys. But so who's saying they love the Isla Rona? Oh, that's Elaine. Yes, it's a lovely place. Lovely place. So we're coming to the end of our time together, guys. And I thought that we could have another wee song. And I was telling you earlier, well, through this afternoon, we've been speaking about herring a bit. And herring was a very, very popular fish and very abundant for a long time. And fishermen used to hunt it when it was in season in their area. But as ships grew larger and they started using the drift nets, they could then go and fish for them whatever the season, because they could go to the fish instead of waiting for the fish to come to them. And huge amounts were brought in. 1907, 25 million herring were brought in that year. So you had to have the fishermen, and then on land you had to have the people who would gut them and who would cure them and pack them. And it was usually young women who were the packers. And they very deftly would fill these barrels with herring, so fully packed. And you can imagine the salt on their hands. They had to be very, very careful of their hands. And I'm sure that during their packing, they used to sing. And this wee song is called Herring's Heads. And it's a song for you to join in. It's basically the anatomy of the fish. And the chorus is very easy to pick up. I'm not even going to put it in the into the messages, because you'll pick it up, no bother at all. And it goes like this. Ah, fiddle wee dee with a herring's head, fiddle wee dee with a herring's head. We'll mak it for loaves, we'll mak it for bread. Herring's head, loaves of bread, and all sorts of things. For all the fish that swim in the sea, the herring it is the fish for me. Sing, fa-la-la-lido, fa-la-la-lido, fa-la-la-lido-lido. Oh, fiddle-wee-dee with a herring's eyes, fiddle-wee-dee with a herring's eyes. We'll mak 'em for puddings, we'll mak 'em for pies. Herring's eyes, puddings and pies, herring's head, loaves of bread, and all sorts of things. For all the fish that swim in the sea, the herring it is the fish for me. Sing, fa-la-la-lido, fa-la-la-lido, fa-la-la-lido-lido. Oh, fiddle-wee-dee with a herring's fins, fiddle-wee-dee with a herring's fins. We'll mak 'em for needles, we'll mak 'em for pins. Herring's fins, needles and pins, herring's eyes, puddings and pies, herring's head, loaves of bread, and all sorts of things. For all the fish that swim in the sea, the herring it is the fish for me. Sing, fa-la-la-lido, fa-la-la-lido, fa-la-la-lido-lido. Oh, fiddle-wee-dee with a herring's back, fiddle-wee-dee with a herring's back. We'll mak it a laddie and cad for Jack. Herring's back, laddie for called Jack. Herring's fins, needles and pins, herons' eyes, puddings and pies, herons' head, loaves of bread, and all sorts of things. For all the fish that swim in the sea, the heron it is the fish for me. Sing, fa-la-la-lido, fa-la-la-lido, fa-la-la-lido-lido. Oh, fiddle-wee-dee with a heron's belly, fiddle-wee-dee with a heron's belly. We'll mak it a lassie and cod for Nelly. Heron's belly, lassie cod Nelly. Heron's back, laddie cod Jack. Heron's fins, needles and pins. Heron's eyes, puddings and pies. Heron's head, loaves of bread, and all sorts of things. For all the fish that swim in the sea, the heron it is the fish for me. Sing, fa-la-la-lido, fa-la-la-lido, fa-la-la-lido-lido. Last one. Oh, fiddle-wee-dee with a heron's tail, fiddle-wee-dee with a heron's tail. We'll mak it a ship wi' a beautiful sail. Heron's tail, ship wi' a sail. Heron's belly, lassie cod Nelly. Heron's back, laddie cod Jack. Heron's fins, needles and pins. Heron's eyes, puddings and pies. Heron's head, loaves of bread, and all sorts of things. For all the fish that swim in the sea, the heron it is the fish for me. Sing, fa-la-la-lido, fa-la-la-lido, fa-la-la-lido-lido. Hope you were singing there. Well done, everybody. So, I have another joke for you. What name does a hermit crab give to its home? What name does a hermit crab give to its home? And there we go. Let's see if you've got the answer. Oh, it was great to hear you, Dawn. Thanks for singing. And Wendy, yeah, and Ruth. And I'm glad you liked it, Sheen. And thanks, David. Good to see you on. It's a good song, Heather, isn't it? I hope you were singing. Excellent. So, yes. Can anybody get that joke for me? Oh, Alison, lovely to have you here. I hope you were singing as well. Yeah. So the answer to that joke, what name does a hermit crab give to its home? It's called Michelle. I really like that one. I think that's fun. Sorry. That's my sense of humour. Oh, you got it, David. Well done. You got it. Cool. Well, guys, I'm feeling pretty puggled, and I think that I'm coming to an end there. But it's been so lovely to have you along. Thank you very, very much for coming, and I hope you've enjoyed all the stories, and thank you for being part of this with me. It's great to see you all. So take care, and the stories are for retelling, so please take those stories as my gift to you and use them again. Next time I'm on, it's going to be a Zoom session with some of my pals for up here, and we're doing spooky stories, and that's on the 12th of October, and you'll see more on the Facebook page coming up. And then there's something else very close to my heart coming at the end of the month that I'll tell you about later on as well. So all the very, very best to each one of you, and hope to see you again. Take care. Cheerio now.